Hi there. Reports are starting to come out that Benioff and Weiss's adaptation of Three Body Problem for Netflix has gone ridiculously over budget. And there were also some telling comments made in their recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter that seem to tie in with this. Now, the first book in this trilogy is an X-Files-like techno-thriller about an incoming alien invasion. Then the second book is the one that has time skips to hundreds of years in the future where there's space battles and future city sets when the aliens actually come 400 years from now. The first book is human collaborators waiting for the aliens to come, trying to soften us up by sabotaging our scientific experiments so we can't reach their tech level. But book one is set entirely in the present day. It doesn't have a lot of special effects. A lot of it is scientists talking in rooms, or the collaborator conspiracy talking about things to assassinate people. From both a special effects and set construction standpoint, why would this go so ridiculously over budget? And on top of all of this, there's already been an alternate adaptation that came out in China itself half a year ago from Tencent, which adapted the first book for a small fraction of the cost, so you can make a direct comparison. And I've been catching episodes of it as I can. Now, I can only work with information at hand, and this is only just starting to come out. It seems that channels who focus on the Three Body Problem books are more focused on explaining the story and lore of the books than on noticing red flags or behind-the-scenes production problems, a pattern which, unfortunately, I myself and others in Game of Thrones book fandom did. That I see the parallels. They're doing what we did, where you're only focusing on the lore. They're actually saying weird things about how they produced it, how efficiently they're working, do they know how to run a TV show. They're overlooking all that because they're projecting what they want to see. And we did this. We didn't suspect. They don't really know what they're doing. It's a chaos behind the scenes. Similarly, like Justice League, when Joss Whedon came in, everyone thought, well, Whedon's a genius, and didn't know he was really fighting with the cast members all the time. When word was coming out in public, it's just that people didn't want to scrutinize it. That we spent so much time naively about, we're going to get our show, we're going to get our show. And, like, you already have a show. You have the Tencent version, was very faithful. Point is, no one really scrutinized this. Someone had to point this out to me through the comment sections of my earlier videos. This was a Wikipedia update only a few weeks ago, linking to an interview that one of the Chinese producers gave. The Chinese producers they licensed the rights from gave a podcast like 2 months ago, where he remarked that the project has gone incredibly over budget. Now, I can't really examine sources in the Chinese language, and I tried at least sharing it to people who do know it, but on top of that, this podcast was behind a paywall. But I understand this is a big if, assuming the information is being accurately relayed, and this is the first we're hearing any news about what is the production price tag on this. If this podcast was accurate, it appears that Benioff and Weiss's Three Body Problem production budget for season 1 alone is around $200 million. And in some respects, when you add on the unusually large licensing fee and officially unusually large showrunner contract, it nearly rivals Lord of the Rings of Power in cost. This thing, if you factor all that in, it might be up to $500 million. And one way or another, there's no way this can make that money back. That either Netflix will have to double down on it under the sunk cost fallacy that it's too big to cancel, or if it does get canceled after one season or they switch showrunners, it'll be a massive blow to Benioff and Weiss. Either way, the cost involved means the stakes are very high. That is the point of this video, that when we heard just how much they're going over budget. And the other point of the video is, this is a consistent pattern of Benioff on Game of Thrones. He constantly overspent on everything. He doesn't really know how to run a TV show other than throw money at a problem, which was well and good 10 years ago, but in this era of belt-tightening, he doesn't know how to function like that. They can't keep covering for his failures anymore. In terms of that, they would just pay, when things were going behind schedule, he didn't know how to plan it out, well, they just pay more money. Now you need someone who's really thinking out what to do. Well, this other quote, like I said, from the Hollywood Reporter interview really stood out to me, tying in with all of that. Full quote. "The drama has a sprawling ensemble cast, locations around the globe, sequences set in a mind-bending virtual reality world, and enough physics to fill a season of Cosmos." Bernadette Caulfield, their lead producer in charge of physical coordination of filming logistics on Game of Thrones, who is returning for this, said, quote, "There's so many locations and none of them stick around. There's so many one-offs. There's not one regular throne room in the whole show." Wow. That even compared to like the 10-cent version would have like the same office over again. But first here, in case you're new, this is a warning for the three body problem people. Benioff and Weiss were notorious for going over budget and not even paying attention to this on Game of Thrones. Wasting money building sets that they barely used. I covered this particularly during Season 8 where it became a blatant problem. And just listening to the Blu-ray commentaries, it was deeply unsettling how out of touch they were with their production staff were really angry about this, and they were just flippantly, "I don't care." And just the things we learned about, things you wouldn't know just from watching Season 8 cold on screen, that they made a fully realized Winterfell set. Like, it had a functional bakery and a functional brewery that they knew the camera would never see the insides of. Then why did you build it? Or the King's Landing city streets that they wasted on just that Arya chase that didn't even serve the story. They made like a 17 alleyway, fully furnished buildings. The shops are fully furnished. The camera never goes in them. And just, why? And you even see the crew members starting to go, I didn't realize until we filmed all the fire and stuff in the King's Landing sets, this is like a 3-minute scene and we spent 7 months building these sets. And just the dawning realization on their faces that this was poorly planned relative to its use. Another big one is in the commentary tracks. Like, there's a point where Dave Hill, who's another one of their lackeys, their assistants, where he's outright taunting Deborah Riley, their head production designer, for, "We made you build the Wintertown." In the Season 8 premiere, that the Wintertown is the commoner town outside of Winterfell Castle. And you could have done that with a matte painting or CGI, because it's on screen for literally 3 seconds. And he's joking, "Haha, we made you actually make these buildings," when there's a finite amount of budget and time. Things like that. Or Benioff himself flippantly joking in his commentary for the finale, "Oh yeah, against Deborah's complaints, we insisted they build a staircase, the spiral staircase in the Red Keep when Jon is going in to confront Daenerys. But they darkened it so much you can't see it." And he's admitting this, we made her waste 3 days and $10,000 she didn't have and complained, "Don't make me do this," and ultimately didn't even use it. But the Wintertown thing is even bigger scale than that, of just what? And that she is there she's deadpanning, "Yup, you sure did that." And he isn't even picking up on how angry she is. I have a clip of this in my channel, I'll link it. But, we went over budget, building sets we didn't need instead of planning out how to reuse them efficiently. And this is a nightmare. It's not just that it was very expensive. It's not just that they said, "I want to build this thing, and this thing, the Wintertown and all of that. We did a check, it'll cost $200 million. HBO, give me $200 million. They would only figure this out halfway through filming. Because Benioff is a naughty man-child in an adult's body who's constantly figured out it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So he'll spend and just Daddy'll come and pay for this, is that mentality, not just him, for a lot of people. But as Deborah Riley herself said in other clips, if you go to the front of my channel, my cover video is this whole longer 40-minute thing with highlight clips from the Last Watch documentary. And there's a point where she goes, the production scale and budget they came up with is fantasy. It's ridiculous that you have no basis. How did you even guess how much this cost? You don't know any of this. I mean, just ridiculous lowball estimates like, it'll take 2 weeks to do that 6-week job. Why not 1 week? Why not 1 day? 2 weeks is as ridiculous as saying 2 days. Where is he even pulling these numbers? As he just mouthed any number and just thought, oh, we'll throw money at it, it'll fix it, and acted like they had infinite money. Or he put down, like, build the winter town for 10 million, and when Deborah looked at it, went, this would cost at least 20 million. How did you even get that number? Things like it. So I know it's to scale. I mean, if you want to, like, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power wants to build this really impressive set for the Mines of Moria, and they estimate it'll cost $100 million, and they spend 90 million, that's rational people acting within the logistics of film production and budgeting. And this whole video, I'm not even touching story ideas. I'm accepting as a given these are your story decisions. I'm accepting, okay, you have Jon kill Daenerys. Why did you make your production designer waste all of that money building a staircase you then didn't film? Or okay, they built the winter town for 3 seconds. Why? This is purely focused on logistical production, which is harder to dismiss because it's not, oh, you didn't like it? Well, I did. It's harder to defend that they really don't know how production works and they don't care. And it's supposed to be delegating. And they would be surrounded by, career experts, professionals, veterans in TV set construction planning. And these two guys who had never worked in TV before were overruling them. That we got to fail upwards and now we're talking down to you and overruling you when they're telling him how to avoid disaster. It's like someone warning a politician about climate change or warning the mayor about the sharks in the water, that this is a problem. You have no idea how the math is working on this. They just didn't care. And this was this pervasive pattern that they'd ask for, not just that it was over budget, but they'd ask for things and then not even use them. Not just, oh, I want that expensive thing and I don't really have a concept of how much it costs. Building sets once, rather than like, this could be a matte painting because we're not, relative to the use we're getting out of it, it doesn't justify building a physical set in terms of money and time. As I've pointed out a lot on my channel, House of the Dragon did the exact opposite. That it helps that the story is more contained. Obviously, most of it is in the Red Keep, Dragonstone, and Driftmark. There's really just 3 locations in Season 1, main ones, but they emphasized a lot in their behind-the-scenes videos, we are carefully picking and choosing when to not build a set. That they didn't build Storm's End as a physical set because they knew we are only going to be there twice. Meeting in the throne room. We're not interacting with any physical objects. It's only in for 2 scenes. Let's use a digital set for that. And we'll mask it as best we can. But it doesn't justify making it. I honestly think Benioff was trying to build as many sets as possible from the out-of-universe perspective, that he was trying to... When he gave studio executives tours of the set, it looked really impressive. I'm not just saying this, like when you look at the full Last Watch documentary, not the clips I made, and when you saw the news reports leading up to Season 8, whenever they gave people tours of the sets, it was jaw-dropping to them. And rightly so. We actually saw the documentary team going through these. There's these fully realized King's Landing sets. This Winterfell set is amazing. Everything is there. The kitchens, the kennels, and they barely filmed any of it because they were so focused on put the camera on the lead actor's face to pander them for awards, that they don't plan these things well in terms of how much money are you really getting out of this. Because the people on the ground never see the whole scale. They assume, wow, they sure must be getting a lot of use out of this bakery they never use, that kind of thing. And quite recently, a lot of this came up in discussions about the proposed Voyages of Young Corlys spin-off, the 9 Voyages of Corlys Velaryon, where George R. R. Martin himself had to explain we've shifted it from a live-action pitch to an animated one because the scale would be astronomical, that we'd never use the same set twice because he visits different ports in every episode. Even like the Nymeria show, the scale would be bigger, but there aren't quite as many locations. You could build like Croyane or a beach in Sothorios and get a lot of use out of it. Corlys would be going from Karth to Yeti to Ibn to all sorts of things. So we already, a month ago, had this really big discussion about if you have too many set locations, how many are justified in building relative to their reuse. House of the Dragon embraced this principle well. They had a digital set for Storm's End, whereas Game of Thrones built the Wintertown over the objections of the overworked production designer. The budget for Three Body Problem, if all these reports are true, is well over $200 million. Relative to House of the Dragon, which was also $200 million. That this is an X-Files style techno-thriller in Season 1. How did you even match this? And even though House of the Dragon was $200 million, they've repeatedly said we prided ourselves on coming in under budget. And they've explained that, not just bluster, they've explained how they cut corners in the behind-the-scenes videos. You know, how much is true, we don't know, but they aren't priding themselves on how much they spend, as if that impresses people, but on look at how we cleverly came up with something under budget. Similarly, Lord of the Rings of Power cost $500 million, but those were within their price projections for a shoot of that scale. Now, I have about 6 major points in this long-form podcast / video. I'm going to put up a slide for each of the 6 points. That was point 1. Benioff has always gone over budget, simply building sets he doesn't need, and he has no concept of this, even when people warn him otherwise. Point 2 is that Season 1 of Three Body Problem doesn't even need to be that expensive, because we've seen, like I said, by comparison with the Chinese 10-cent version, how cheaply they were able to do that. We have a hard example of this. Yes, it was a shoestring budget. It wasn't that visually impressive, but it's more of a story-driven thing. I've been watching it on PBS. It's pretty interesting that we were given a figure of $200 million for Season 1 of this Netflix Three Body Problem across 8 episodes. The other thing they revealed in the interview was it's going to be an 8-episode season, which is normal for Netflix these days. That's about $25 million per episode. House of the Dragon Season 1, yes, it also cost $200 million across a 10-episode season, with prominent dragon CGI and fantasy sets that you need to build from scratch, not just we're filming in an office building. So, on a per-minute ratio, it already seems that Season 1 of Three Body Problem is arguably more expensive than House of the Dragon. And that's the scale we're looking at compared to what Tencent did, because obviously it's a shoestring budget. I've enjoyed the PBS broadcast. I think I'm up to episode like 11 now. It was on yesterday. I wrote this script I'm making for this as I was watching a Three Body Problem episode from Tencent on PBS. The Tencent China adaptation did the first book in 30 episodes, 45 minutes each, and that translates into about 22 hours. Sort of like, that's not that unusual, 30 minutes. Well, TV shows used to have 22-episode seasons in the US, but like 20 years ago, but nearly 3 times as long. But let's say, for the sake of argument, because this was a really faithful cut-nothing-out adaptation, let's phrase it conservatively as Tencent's version was twice as long as Netflix's 8-episode version. Okay? It didn't need a very large budget because Season 1 is cerebral, it's scientists talking in labs about real physics concepts, and for the first season in isolation, I don't know the exact dollar number, because I've heard different things. Some people told me it cost as little as $50 million. I know it was a cheaply produced thing. Some have even told me $10 million. I find that unlikely, but to be generous, for the sake of argument, being generous to Netflix, let's say that Tencent's version cost as much as $100 million to make twice as many episodes. So it's over twice as long, but cost half as much. So the ratio is something like, per minute ratio is something like 4 times as much. And yes, it is obviously shoestring budget versus mainstream Netflix flagship show should be more expensive. I'd expect it to be a ratio of 2 times as much, not 4 times as much. It's twice as long and costs half as much. It just demonstrates it didn't need all of this. Where is the money physically going? Which now brings us to my third point in this podcast. What could they have possibly spent this much money on? Physically. Even with the knowledge that they're going over budget on set construction, how could you have reached a number this jaw-droppingly high? Set construction, it's filmed in the modern day. Like when you look at the Tencent version, it's in office buildings. Digital effects. Some of the digital effects for like when the aliens do weird things, or when they're showing a physics concept using like a billiard ball flying around. To give you the example of, well, on the quantum level, it's like particles do this. And it'll be weird to see that in real life on a macro scale. Looking at the special effects we saw in the full trailer they debuted last week, did you see special effects comparable to all of like the Dragon CGI and medieval cityscapes in House of the Dragon? So purely from the real world modern day setting of this, just scientists talking in rooms, how did you couldn't have gotten that much from set construction or special effects. However, in case you already said this in the comments, the obvious suspicion is maybe all the money went into the VR world. Only in the first book, the Doomsday Cult, who want to collaborate with the invading aliens, basically use this really advanced VR headset game as a recruitment tool of sorts. This is the short version. So a big thing in Season 1 is this VR game, which is a recruitment to try to solve the three-body problem. Maybe if we help the aliens, they won't attack us. The Tencent China version, I just saw this episode, showed the VR world with off-the-shelf video game graphics. Not even good off-the-shelf graphics, but like something from 10 years ago. It looks like the parody CGI they use in political ads sometimes there, that it wasn't even trying to be photorealistic, it was cartoonish. That they, well, not cartoon, but they remark on how detailed the VR world is in terms of world building. That there's a point where when the planet suddenly freezes due to a gravitational shift and their civilization gets wiped out in the game, the problem is the aliens have a very erratic orbit for their home planet. It either freezes or burns randomly. When it starts freezing and the scientist playing the game notices it was snowing dry ice. Like you could tell it wasn't regular snow, it was supposed to be dry ice. Frozen CO2. And it's part of him saying a game wouldn't need to be that detailed for the purposes of what the alleged game is. And it leads him to realize this is based on the aliens' real home planet, that it's meant to represent something real. Basically, they tried to crowdsource a solution to the three-body problem, because their home planet goes around 3 stars and it burns or freezes them all the time due to their erratic orbit. But it's not represented graphically of, oh, it's frozen CO2. It's just, he notes, oh, you see pixels in his hand. He goes, oh, this is supposed to be dry ice. This isn't regular snow. It's not photorealistic dry ice or anything. So while they do mention this is a very detailed game, it doesn't look that way in the Tencent version. It's not trying to be. Maybe they did this on purpose to avoid confusion, more probably the budget, but it's not even the focus of the narrative. I mean, it's part of the mystery, so it is kind of, but they weren't even trying to impress us with the video game graphics. It's just part of the mystery. And the other parts of the show really focus more on the human collaborator conspiracy. They're not really a selling point of Tencent's three-body problem show. In contrast, Benioff and Weiss's Netflix version seems to want to sell us on the empty spectacle of big sets and special effects in a story that the first season doesn't lend itself well to that. Later seasons might, this doesn't. And it's just a problem they have to deal with. There's 2 possible things they could have spent all this money on for the VR world. Maybe they spent a lot on photorealistic graphics, from what little we've seen in the trailers, though they don't really need them. I mean, the Tencent version didn't. Like that shot in the trailer when gravity reverses and they all go flying in the air looks fairly realistic. It looks like, oh, there's this debris, water is floating upward. Maybe that costs a lot of money. I don't see how it could cost that much money, though. That this can't compare to all the VFX on House of the Dragon, and even then it's needless. That even if that's where the money went, it's needless. You could have Tencent showed you could tell the story without it. Even then, I'm struggling to see how you spent $200 million on just this level of CGI for the VR game. There's an even more upsetting possibility. Did Benioff and Weiss's Three Body Problem, their TV series, actually build physical sets to represent the VR world? Again, I'm thinking of the Tencent version, it looks like a cheap video game. From what we see in the trailers, they actually have the actors in period costume in the video game world. You could have gotten away with using a digital set extension for the VR world, when it's like an ancient Chinese temple in the Ming era, or another one in the Tencent version was a steam engine in the 1800s. You could have used a digital set, and it would have tied in with it isn't real. Why are you trying to impress us with building real sets in what's supposed to be a fake world? And that's another thing. They tried to, like, in the clip they released where they were trying to emphasize it's indistinguishable from reality, you can even smell and taste things. And then they try to show, like, they never understood. Tell me about this in the comments if you're one of my regulars here. Like, theory of mind that they just don't have. That they would put script notes in, giving exposition that the actors then could not convey plot details through nonverbal facial expressions, stuff we saw in, like, the Season 7 scripts when they came out, that this is bizarrely hyper-detailed. They're novelists who weren't really trained in screenwriting, that you can't express that. It's only what you can convey in audio, of dialogue, or maybe visually. It's not smell-o-vision. That maybe it was just because it was a 1-minute clip, maybe I'm overemphasizing this, but are you really going to try to emphasize you can smell and taste things and touch things there by having the actors over-emote that they're sniffing things, as opposed to just treating it as a mention that once? I don't know. That maybe they were so fixated on we have to convey that it's indistinguishable from reality that they built real sets, when this does not come up again after the first book. The VR game is a subplot of the first book that goes away. It's not the focus of the entire show. So, I don't know. This is one of those things that you need to keep an eye out for as behind-the-scenes videos come out. Did they build that? Another thing House of the Dragon did, not just, that springs to mind because we have a lot of photos of it, I said Storm's End was a digital set. They didn't build a single thing for Harrenhal in Season 1. They did for Season 2 because they're spending time there, but the prologue scene, the very first scene of the very first episode, which most of you have probably at least checked out, where, if you're a three-body problem person, not regular to my channel, that entire scene in the big castle was a digital set, and when they showed us behind the scenes, they emphasized, we are proud this was a digital set, it saved money, it's just a giant green screen. There's actors in full costume. Will Benioff and Weiss's behind-the-scenes videos emphasize and try to impress us with, look at how we built the ancient temple that's in the VR game? That you're only going to use once, that was incredibly expensive, and you have a limited finite budget. That this was taking away from other things. So that's one of the things I'm going to run down an actual checklist at the end of this, of where did the money go, and how much of this was the VR world? Did the VR world have physical sets, which it blatantly didn't need? That if you didn't want to use the cartoony humans in the Tencent version, fair enough that you wanted the real actors, the flesh meat actors as we saw in the clips, being in the digital world. But okay, why didn't you have live actors on a green screen? No, it has to be the full thing. I want the full winter town. Damn it, I want that polar bear. That whole thing where, remember Season 7, they kept saying, it was bizarre when people remark on this clip a lot, damn it, I want a zombie polar bear. And it's not that I'm opposed to having a zombie polar bear in Season 7 of Game of Thrones. There were zombie polar bears in the books. I felt cheated we didn't have one. It's the way they're describing that our production staff kept telling us it was too expensive. or that it's really hard to film because you need a guy in a green suit shaped like a bear. And their answer was, damn it, I want it. Was startling. It's the way they said it. So, set construction for something that's either in the modern day office buildings or a digital world that you didn't need to build sets for, you could have gotten away with a green screen. Special effects are... How much special effects are in this compared to, like, photorealistic dragons in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? What did they spend all of this money on? The only other possibility, even if they're terrible at planning sets, I'm struggling to think of how they could have wasted this much money. You don't, like, double your budget or something on just we only used sets once. Even this is straining... I'm struggling to even think of how if they were trying to waste this much money. I don't know how they spent this much. One minor possibility before I go to the next section is maybe the only other possibility is actor contracts, but that wouldn't apply here. Because you think, like, Game of Thrones had really big actor contracts for the core 5 cast members in the final seasons, getting like $250,000 per episode, but that's because the show was already a hit, and these were big actors by that point who could go on to do movies. Obviously, like, Lena Headey's going to be able to or Peter Dinklage will be able to get a big contract. Most of the cast members in this are relative unknowns. The only 3 that are really known are former Game of Thrones cast members: John Bradley, who was Sam Tarley, Liam Cunningham, who was Davos Seaworth. They're recognizable, but these are not like a Nicole Kidman, Jared Harris scale actor like when Jared Harris did Foundation. I don't see how you could be paying them that much, and even then, John Bradley and Liam Cunningham do not command enough of a contract that it would justify a $200 million budget. The third and only really big international star, really international, is veteran actor Jonathan Pryce, who's playing one of the heads of the human collaborators for the Alien Invaders, ETO. He is famous. He would have a high budget. This could not be, like... If this was in the $100 million range, maybe, a 10 cents thing, but how did you get this much purely on production cost? And, again, don't know Chinese. When that guy said $200 million, did he mean including the casting cost or in addition to the casting cost? That's one of the big questions we need to know. But he emphasized, the general point was they are very over budget. So we need to figure that out. What did they say in the actual article about not just... The other thing is, okay, you're building sets, or in Game of Thrones terms, you're building sets, virtual reality, digital effects, cast stuff. One other possibility is expensive physical location shoots. On-location shoots, like, we need to film in a real Roman arena in ruins in Spain. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it costs a lot of money, so okay, I can see how that's where the money went. For the cost of filming at such a location, or when they film in a national park, you actually have to pay a large fee for that. So it's not just, oh, we filmed it in a field, but at a notable exterior location. Or, in this case, because it's a modern-day thing, if you have to film it like the Eiffel Tower, it costs a lot of money to rent out the square and not have people in there. So, okay, maybe it was expensive location shoots. Again, this isn't the kind of show that needs those. The 10-cent version didn't. What did they actually say about not set construction, but where they were filming? In the article. Said mostly in the UK, China, and Panama. Panama, because, well, they didn't mention this in the article. The climax of Book 1 is that they lure the Doomsday Cult's container ship that they use as a command center into a trap at the Panama Canal. Did they needlessly film on location at the actual Panama Canal? They said they filmed in Panama. Maybe they rented out the canal for a full day, which would be astronomically expensive. Why not just have exterior shots of the canal without actually shutting it down? Now, all this is speculative, but they did say they're filmed in Panama. List of things to watch out for are, and they will be bragging about this because they are proud of the expense, and part of spending so much is impressing people. You don't keep it a secret. Look for behind-the-scenes things where they go, we needlessly built sets we didn't need, and we needlessly paid through the nose to film landmarks, like the Eiffel Tower or the Panama Canal, that we didn't really need. Be on the lookout for that. Point 4 out of 6, and this is just examining this from our past experiences with Benioff on Game of Thrones. He's a relic of an earlier era, and I don't think he adapted to it. He wasn't really adapted to it in the last era either, but we are now in the post-streaming boom, where they're belt-tightening, they're canceling shows, tightening budgets. Before that was the streaming boom, where they were just throwing money at things, everyone launching their own thing from 2017, building up to when Disney Plus launched 2019, up until about 2022 when everything climaxed. He got into Game of Thrones in the era before the streaming boom, when it was we won the 2007 writer's strike, the studios, we can make infinite budgets by not paying people. This was before the streaming boom. It was the HBO is run by idiots like Richard Plepler who are willing to throw money at projects. It's not just me saying that, it's like a lot of other reporters for like Business Insider and Maureen Ryan and other people I've seen said the 2010s was an era of insane spending even before the writer's strike. Before the writer's strike, before the streaming wars, all of that, just the early 2010s when Game of Thrones was starting. From the writer's strike ended 2007, when they needed their new hit, that's when they greenlit Game of Thrones, through like when the budget noticeably increased in seasons 4 and 5, they were just throwing money around like there was no tomorrow. And Benioff is a relic of that time. He has never worked on a project where he needed to stay under budget, because he's only done one thing for a decade. And that era failed. The weirdest thing is when you see Plepler and people trying to play off, we're the geniuses that built HBO. No, you're the guys who ran it into the ground. The guy who built it left amidst a personal scandal 2007, and you're picking up the pieces of that. And if you were good at your job, you'd still be in it. That they lost so much money that Time Warner was one of the most indebted companies in the country, in the world, and they had to sell it to AT&T, which later had to sell it to Discovery. That Plepler and the other leadership, you were not managing your money well. You ran it into the ground, and it's just that whole Gilded Age thing of act like we're successful even as we're losing market share to Netflix in the mid-2010s. And I think Benioff's mindset is that it's pervasively 2013, and he's impressing people, not us, but particularly the studio heads. He's impressing them with how much of a budget he can command, how much money he's spending, as opposed to how much money his show is earning, as weird as that sounds, but just the way, how proud they are of their sets. You realize, in terms of resource to benefit cost ratio, while it's the biggest show in the world, it's barely breaking even for some of this stuff. That kind of, like Amazon is also having that thing with Lord of the Rings, that, well, the budget's so high, how profitable is it? That all of the throwing money at we're building sets we don't need, I think was just to show off to people. Not just stupidity, but this, why do they have a drive to, damn it, I want to have the Wintertown for 3 seconds as a fully realized set? Why do we need to film on an actual glacier where it's dangerous? Or in a national park where it costs a lot to film in this grassland because it's expensive? Or this Islamic palace in Spain, which is really expensive and has filming limitations. He's just showing off. And he hasn't adapted to that we are living in the post-streaming boom. Even when this show is greenlit, when they greenlit this show, Netflix greenlit it in September of 2020, it was still the height of the streaming boom. Disney Plus had launched 12 months before. It only really started fading early 2022 when Discovery bought out HBO Max, that this is the consolidation era. And the really bigger thing than that was Netflix for the first time had negative growth, even though they actually recovered a little from that in the past year, that we aren't growing, we're not experiencing hand over fist growth for the first time. That the boom era ended. I've talked to this in other videos, that we're not going to see new streaming platforms trying to launch with their Game of Thrones every new season. Like, and here's the new Apple TV Plus with its own sci-fi shows trying to be the next Game of Thrones. We're not seeing entire new platforms launching like that with new flagships. This is a consolidation period. Someone's going to buy Paramount. And all of the mentality he went into that is a relic of that we need to expand thing. Which, of course, brings me into the next point, point 5. Beyond the mere production costs for Season 1, you have to factor in the massive licensing fee. When they were willing to make big contracts, to hire lots of people, and to buy up a lot of content, the number we have is that they spent $200 million for the production of Season 1 alone. That doesn't even cover how much they had to spend to get the rights to it in the first place. We don't have an exact number. This is one of the things I wasn't able to figure out, but particularly from reading the article, if you're watching these in order, remember that originally, Three Body Problem is going to be made as an Amazon Prime Video show with Rian Johnson as sole showrunner. But, because this is a best-selling hard sci-fi book in China, the Chinese licensor Yuzu Group, who held the license, at the last minute demanded even more money. And Amazon felt it wasn't worth it, so they broke off. Eventually, Netflix came along and said, we are willing to pay that higher price in this bidding war. Netflix got the rights. Then Netflix assigned it to Benioff and Weiss to get their money's worth out of them. So, what does that tell us? Amazon, of all people, felt that whatever the licensing fee was, it was astronomically high and not worth it. Amazon Prime, the same company that spent almost $500 million on making Lord of the Rings of Power. So we're not sure exactly what Netflix paid for this, but it's something Amazon was unwilling to pay, which has near infinite money from their shipping industry. And maybe this could be they didn't feel it was proportionate to it. You know, obviously, it gives the impression this was something like $200 million contract or something. Maybe they asked for $20 million, and Amazon said, look, it's worth $10 million, because this is popular in China, it's not popular here. It reminds me of, if you watch Japanese anime, there's this whole thing of why isn't Gundam that popular in America? When Gundam, which is, it's a near future, it's kind of like The Expanse, actually, that it's this near future fighting with space colonies and Earth orbit show from the late 70s. Bandai didn't license Gundam in America for a long time because they asked for a really high price, because they said, this is as popular as Star Wars is in Japan. And the American distributors kept trying to tell them, it's that popular in Japan. No one has heard of it in America, or at least not yet. That you need to put it out cheaply here to build up interest, then gradually increase the price. You can't ask for Japan prices in America, they don't even know what it is, and just they refuse to accept this. So maybe this is something similar, that the Tencent, Yuzu Group, everyone who owned the rights said, well, this is our Star Wars, and they went, yeah, for you guys, we have to sell it here first. The book was reasonably popular in sci-fi, hard sci-fi, book reader circles, but I don't know exactly how much they were offering. It's all relative, other than that it was something Amazon was willing to drop a project for. How much did Lord of the Rings of Power cost for its license, by comparison? Just for the TV rights, not the production cost, was $250 million. Which even at the time, people said was insane. That Amazon overpaid for that. The actual asking price was something like $150 million, and it got argued up to the licensing alone for all seasons, for a 5-season show. The TV rights are $250 million. And Amazon was willing to pay it. So maybe it wasn't as big because, it's a Chinese thing they thought wouldn't do well in the United States, but I would think at least $100 million conservatively. That this was a big license. We don't have an exact number. I recognize I'm guessing. But it was a lot. I mean, 200 million, I'm going to functionally go, let's say it could have been up to 100 million. And whatever it was something Netflix considered very large. Perhaps not just proportionately, but objectively. Which brings me back around to, I was starting to mention this before, point 6. Benioff and Weiss's massive contract fee. Like I said, I don't know Chinese and I don't know the details. I want to know if someone gets through that paywall or just future interviews will mention this. The production of season 1 was 200 million. When the fee for Benioff and Weiss's showrunner contract was also 200 million. Functionally doubling the cost. Because unlike just any regular show, unlike even for like Rings of Power, which was a one-show contract, when Benioff and Weiss started working for Netflix in late 2019, they signed on for a 5-year multi-show development contract that since then they have done nothing with. That it's not just that they were paid $200 million, they were paid $200 million for multiple shows. And even the interview article itself awkwardly points that out. That so much is riding on this because it is functionally as if the price tag for what should have been 3 shows is all now the pressure on 1 show. Which means it will never succeed as much as it needs to. It has to be 3 times as successful as a regular good show just to break even. Imagine like the Duffer Brothers said, we're going to give you 3 shows on the scale of Stranger Things, and they made a show as successful as Stranger Things, 1 show, and they're looking at them going, well, you owe us 3 times as much as this generated. You only made 1. And that's assuming it's a good show. They've made nothing else of note that when you have these big multi-show development deals, therefore production families that are production companies that delegate to sub-showrunners all under one big production head. They're for Shonda Rhimes, Ryan Murphy types. For example, Greg Berlanti was the lead producer developing DC Comics live-action Arrowverse for the CW back in the 2010s. And Greg Berlanti, he's making like 5-6 shows, had a $400 million development deal because he was overseeing all of the DC Comics live-action TV shows. He was like the Kevin Feige, as Kevin Feige is to Marvel movies, he was to DC live-action TV shows. So it kind of made sense that, well, yeah, I'm doing more than 1 show. He didn't personally work as showrunner on all of them. He delegated to people, but was planning out the bigger things and crossovers and trends. But the direct example is for Netflix itself. That wasn't Netflix. Netflix hired Ryan Murphy and Shonda Rhimes in the same year as they hired Benioff in 2019, as part of that streaming boom, actually leading up to the streaming boom, which launched fall of 2019, as we're gearing up that we need a lot of shows to compete with all these new things like Disney Plus and Apple and stuff, and Amazon. By comparison, Ryan Murphy, who he oversees things like American Horror Story, American Crime Story, Glee, he's done a lot of shows. He did sign a $300 million, multi-million development contract, but for $300 million in that time, he's made 10 projects. 4 TV shows, 3 TV movies, and 3 documentaries. But let's say 4 TV shows of appreciable size for $300 million, generously. Shonda Rhimes, who did Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, and one of her shows is Bridgerton for Netflix, that she's in part of her development company. Shonda Rhimes had a contract for $150 million, and she made 8 TV series. Well, Murphy did 10 things, some were TV shows, some weren't. She did 8 shows. They're not all full-hour dramas. Some of them are cheaper than others. Obviously, this isn't like some giant sci-fi epic or fantasy epic, and there are people talking in rooms. But still, she's coordinating 8 separate TV shows. I think, 6 of one, a dozen of the other. Well, she has 8 shows. Some of them are things versus Murphy's things tend to be bigger projects. You see, I'm not trying to be unfair here, that sometimes I could see someone being paid 200 million and cranking out 3 major shows, and that would kind of be worth it. Like large scale shows, not like Game of Thrones things, but like, I'm not trying, I don't know how big The Witcher is, but things of note, like Wheel of Time scale things, something of, it's another big show that people are talking about. Or even the Duffer Brothers can at least point to, we're working on Stranger Things, it's really huge. In contrast, Benioff and Weiss haven't made anything in 4 years. Not due to the pandemic, other people were making TV shows or licensing them in the same time period. They got hired late 2019, did nothing for a full year, and then they said we assigned them Three Body Problem by fall of 2020. And they haven't been working on anything else since, and it's gotten unusual. Here's the quote from the article. What adds even more importance to the project is that they haven't been working on anything else, that we work better focused on one thing, Weiss says. It's the elephant strategy versus the sea turtle strategy. The sea turtle has 1,000 babies and points them all to the ocean, hopes 10 make it. The elephant takes care of one child. I respect other people's ability to multitask. It's just not what we're good at. And Benioff, if we're going to be on set every day, you can't do it with multiple shows. By mere process of elimination, what are these guys allegedly good at? That they're not, they go, well, they're not good at production. I never worked in TV before. They're not good at production logistics, and if they didn't learn after 8 seasons on a big show like Game of Thrones, they never will. They openly admit they're bad at multitasking multiple things. And Game of Thrones was like 3 shows in one. They keep going, I was on set every day. You were filming in 2 countries simultaneously. At a certain point, you had to be able to delegate to other people. Don't tell me, oh, if I'm not there micromanaging it, it won't happen. You're supposed to be delegating this to other people, but they want to be in control. Even though the art of running a big TV show, much less... The art of running a big TV show is multitasking and delegating. And we have example after example of them ignoring their department heads and micromanaging them. And he knowingly signed a multi-show development deal for Netflix. Did he ever seriously intend to deliver on that? Does he overestimate himself? I don't know. Just, oh, I'm bad at multitasking for the head of a TV show? And just remember everything else, like, we made fun of it at the time when Netflix made their press releases about hiring them in 2019. We've hired these genius storytellers. And we joke they're not genius storytellers. Even if you think they're good at adapting things, they're not. Netflix was paying them, part of that $200 million contract was for new ideas. Like, you hire J.J. Abrams and he says, I'm going to try and make this show called Demimonde. Ultimately got dropped by Warner Media, but okay, you hire Ryan Murphy, he comes up with a new idea for a horror show or something. Part of that $200 million was they thought that, when have these guys ever had original ideas? Game of Thrones was someone else's thing that they took off with. So, did you think they'd be adapting more? Okay, they're good at adapting. Even if you believe that, did you think they'd be adapting more than one thing at the same time? This was a 5-year contract for something like 3 or 4 big shows. And therein lies the point. Three Body Problem, even if it is successful relative to one major TV show, what you expect of one major TV show, it has already failed. Because of the massive price tag that they paid for the showrunner contracts. Crunching the numbers. By way of comparison, Three Body Problem and Lord of the Rings of Power. We know the Season 1 production cost for both. Season 1 in isolation, just the production, probably not including casting, I'm not sure. And we know the licensing rights for Rings of Power, but not for Three Body Problem. And conversely, we know the showrunner contract for Three Body Problem, but not exactly for Rings of Power. Production cost. Three Body Problem was $200 million, Rings of Power $450 million, give or take. Licensing fee. Rings of Power license was $250 million. This was considered high even for Lord of the Rings. So the combined cost was something like 700 million, production plus licensing, for Rings of Power. I can only guess what the licensing fee was for Three Body Problem. I already spent time yelling about this, but it's something that was big enough that Amazon passed on it. Maybe it was relative to its size, but this was at the height of the point when Amazon was throwing money at things. 2019, 2018, leading up to the streaming boom, they felt it wasn't worth it. When it is a major franchise in China that they knew had a lot of potential. So probably not the 250 million of Lord of the Rings, which even Lord of the Rings felt was ridiculously high. Is it fair to guess 50 to $100 million? Let's say 100 million, as something Amazon considered high, and admittedly this is a guess. That would put the licensing fee at 100 million. Production cost, 200 million. Showrunner cost, 200 million. I'm conservatively guessing that the combined debt as they went into the first season for Three Body Problem was around $500 million. Showrunner cost, I already said, it was 200 million for Benioff and Weiss, we knew that. We don't know how much they paid the showrunners for Rings of Power, McKay and Payne, but it was probably much less than what they paid Benioff, because Benioff and Weiss were coming off of this giant Emmy-winning flagship TV show, Game of Thrones, and were very well known and successful. And in addition to that, it was a multi-series deal for 5 years, the type of thing Ryan Murphy would do. Contrast, the Lord of the Rings people, they were script doctors, but they were not award-winning big names. And say what you will of, yes, it's the biggest show in history, 450 million production alone. They weren't hired to do one of those giant multi-show development deals. They were working on one big show. So McKay and Payne were probably paid a lot less than Benioff and Weiss's 200 million. Could have been 100 million. Could have been as low as 50 million. I don't think it would. So we know that the total of the license plus production was 700 million. I think the very top range for the combined debt going into the first season for Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, was a ceiling of perhaps 800 million. Probably closer to 750 million, but less than a range of 7 to 800 million in that region, for including the contract. Three Body Problem is including showrunners, production, and licensing fees. Who knows how much they paid for this? 500, perhaps 600 million. Including all the other things. And I don't have these figures for House of the Dragon in terms of the license or the showrunner contract, but Ryan Condal isn't doing more than one show. He's doing House of the Dragon. That isn't comparable. Ryan Condal will be having to do 3 shows on that scale as direct showrunner to get that high. So in some ways, depending on how you count, this is rivaling Lord of the Rings in scale. Particularly for that giant 5-year contract, which even the article had to point out. The bigger question, which I will leave you all with, is, okay, the point is, this thing was incredibly expensive even before it ran over budget. That the scale is nearing Lord of the Rings in size. Tough question because it's not TV ads with Nielsen ratings anymore. There's a whole complex formula for how much viewership minutes equals subscription revenue. And Lord of the Rings was a highly watched show just for people checking it out. The real question is whether they'll come back. But season 1, if it generated $400 million in revenue, it would at least break even for the production cost, and their hope is it'll pay off the licensing fee over time. But that was the thing I brought up with Lord of the Rings, that how much the only way for Rings of Power to break even and be a success, given the amount they paid on it went over budget a little, was if it is as popular as Game of Thrones was at the height of its run in season 6. That it's really expensive, and Amazon can afford it. I've heard things that season 2 is going to retool. We'll see what happens. It's just, it did well. It didn't mega flop. but they set the bar so high that it fell short of breaking even for now at least. Three Body Problems in an even worse position than that in terms of the relative money they thought they'd be spending on it, and that was effing Lord of the Rings. How popular will this relatively untried, cerebral hard sci-fi novel, considered dense, have to be for season one to make back all of that money? Something in the 600 billion. And I say, the reason I calculated debt going into season one is to figure out the odds of would they cancel this after one season if it underperforms. And I said Lord of the Rings, it didn't do too badly, and they want to make their investment back, and I think it makes sense to keep, I would keep going with it. I didn't think season one would be that good. I thought it would fail. I went, I see potential here. Retool it, see where it goes. Maybe they turned around Wheel of Time in season two, but the numbers aren't there. Nobody sat down to crunch the numbers. They didn't anticipate production being 200 million. To realize, even if this is a successful show, it would be having to do 3 times as well as Stranger Things to make back the money. How much do you think people are actually going to be watching this? Too much money was already spent on it, and one of two things is going to happen. This I know. It is already failed. The fact that the production costs have risen so high, even if it does well for a show of its scale, would need to get triple the ratings or something to get it back. So one of two things happens. Either Netflix doubles down on Benioff and Weiss because they're too big to fail. They have already failed. Or it's such a mega flop that even Netflix would shockingly cancel something this expensive after one season. I honestly don't know which is going to happen. But if, either way, they aren't going out of the news cycle, either Netflix will bizarrely keep promoting them, because like late HBO, they can't afford not to promote them, which will infuriate people and bring Benioff and Weiss into the news cycle constantly. Not good for them, in the long run. Or it's such a mega flop that if they actually cancel it, just if, nothing fails like failure in Hollywood, and the idea that Netflix would cancel such an expensive show, take a $400 million loss essentially, dumping these guys they spent $200 million on after one season for a 5-year contract. Please tell me in the comments if you're following this, that it would signal to the world that they're utter failures and they're not powerful anymore. Which would mean there's blood in the water, and then the sharks come. That people only really speak out about these crazy producer types after a massive failure, and then it spirals. Like only when Joss Whedon was running into criticisms on the Nevers after a break of a few years did people come out of the woodwork to say things that happened on Justice League's filming. Similarly, the hope is, because in the whole article it says they were playing this off as this is our comeback, we're still powerful. This won't just be a failed show. This will be one of the most expensive failures in television history, purely from a financial standpoint. Will weaken their public persona so badly that cast and crew on Game of Thrones will finally feel safe to come out and say what they were really like. That's one of two things that could happen. Will the show necessarily be canceled? That is the third option. I don't know who technically has the rights, because with Game of Thrones, it was this stupid setup, and this is how TV worked back then. Martin's agent had to sell the rights to Benioff, who then shopped it around to HBO to develop, but Benioff held the rights, so they couldn't fire him physically. In contrast, the way they described it, at least, is that Netflix, not Benioff, but Netflix, bought the rights for Three Body Problem from the Chinese company and assigned it to Benioff and Weiss. Now, I'm not sure if since then he argued for I want to have partial ownership of the license. We've heard no word of that. As presented, it seems that he does not own the license to Three Body Problem. Netflix itself does, entirely different from Game of Thrones. So it is possible that they would not cancel the show, but boot Benioff and Weiss off of it and then retool it. which would help because it's a show that has time jumps in it. I mean, Book 2 takes place 400 years after Book 1. Some characters survive into it by freezing themselves. There's this whole plan of when the aliens come, the key scientists and world leaders will freeze themselves and check in periodically until the alien invasion comes to direct everything. This makes sense when you read it. Given the massive time setting and scale switch, you could plausibly soft reboot this after a first season. Would they be able to contractually do that? Well, they signed a 5-year contract in 2019. It is now 2024, and the elephant in the room that they haven't actually mentioned isn't your contract up for renewal this year? That yes, if season 1 does poorly, there is a chance they'll just let their contract run out. Netflix will say, we own it, you don't, we're switching showrunners. It happened to Walking Dead and stuff, but I don't know for certain who exactly holds the rights to what, so that is a big question. Best case scenario for everyone, actually, because that means the Three Body Problem fans get a better retooled show in season 2, and in many ways for us, that's more humiliating for Benioff and Weiss. Because if they cancel the show, they could play it off as Netflix didn't want to make the show. The worst humiliation for a showrunner is when you get booted off, but they keep making the show, and they replace you. So that really is our best case scenario for all involved. It's a big if, but I don't know. So I don't have all the answers to this, but one intriguing thing that we get to look forward to, if this is a mega flop in terms of ratings, I don't know how viewership numbers translate into revenue. But even viewership numbers used to be a secret. They're not anymore. And Netflix won't be able to brush it under the rug if this show underperforms. One of the key demands of the recent writers' strike was that streamers need to actually share their viewership data now, because their payment model for writers was based on a percentage of viewership numbers that they kept secret from the writers themselves. Oh yeah, profits were $1,000. Here's your 10%. Was it 1,000 or was it 2,000 and you're lying to me? I don't legally have to tell you that. Okay, that's not a situation you want. So one of the big results of the strike was you have to make your viewership data public. It came out 2 weeks ago, and it was interesting looking through it, and it shows like Wednesday is one of the top 3 global shows for Netflix. It really is a big hit for them. No wonder they're really pushing, rightly so, good for them. Though even Netflix in their thing points out, these are the raw minute viewership. Like, it doesn't take into account that some of these are hour shows, some of these are half hour. There's more, it does warn. In all fairness, Netflix itself said there's more than one way to interpret this data, but hey, we asked and they gave it. We at least have raw numbers now. They post them every half year that by the end of 2024, no, by summer, because it's an early spring show, they will give us the viewership numbers for Three Body Problem by this summer, publicly. And it won't just be like the usual thing where streamers play off, oh, Rings of Power Season 1 wasn't that bad, it's hard to calculate. This will be a very specific number for how it did. And they already, it has to do as well as 3 TV shows to even break even at this point. Now, like I said, there are major ongoing questions. These are things to just, if you're a person from a Three Body Problem channel, keep these in mind. This stuff is only just coming out. I don't know it. 4 things. First, can we confirm what the exact production cost was for Season 1 alone, for this 8-episode season, which we have heard is at least over $200 million? Second question, what was the exact production cost for Tencent's twice as long but shoestring budget Faithful version in China? That I generously put it as high as $100 million. It could have been cheaper than that. And yes, any showrunner who isn't Benioff and Weiss, if anyone else is doing it at Netflix, it would cost at least twice as much. I'm not begrudging that. It's just, relative to the Chinese show, how much more did you spend? Third question. What was the exact big fee that Netflix paid for the license to this that even Amazon thought was too high? Fourth question, end here. What kind of viewership numbers does Season 1 need to get, in order to translate into a profitable money amount. I don't know what exactly, does someone in the TV industry know this, of such and such viewership? It's actually new to all of us. They've only just started releasing it publicly. What viewership by minute number, when you get spreadsheets like this, is good? What is breaking even? We know that for like Nielsen ratings because we've been using them for over 30 years. What is the viewership benchmark in terms of these new Netflix watch by minute reports that is the bare minimum Three Body Problem needs to get to be considered a success, and what would be considered a disaster? So keep an eye on top of it might just not be very good. Even if it's a decent show, it's like Rings of Power, where this is decent, but it's not water cooler TV of the year, where everyone's really hyped about it, like the final season of Succession. This would have to be twice the size of the... Now, even Succession didn't get that high ratings, it got high awards, but if this thing doesn't get awards, if it doesn't get high ratings, what exactly is their benchmark for success? Because just running the math, they've already lost, that they've already overspent on it to the point it won't be profitable.